Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba from Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the Resident Legal Diva. And it's time for another Mondays with Melba. This is going to be a pretty intense one because we have on Allison Ferber Miller, who I met while she was running for a state attorney in Pinellas County not long after I ran. But we're going to be talking about a really horrible case out of my old office, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, and really just kind of give everybody some insight as to what's happening and ways that you too can raise your voice and get involved if you see this to be as problematic as we do. So first off, Allison, thank you so much for coming again on Mondays with Melba. Please introduce yourself to the viewers who have not met you previously and share a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me again. I feel honored. I am a lawyer. I currently work for a law firm in Pinellas Park, which is in Pinellas County, called Ripley Wisenhunt. I do exclusively capital defense, meaning I defend people who the government has indicted for capital first-degree murder and is seeking the death penalty upon conviction. After running for state attorney in Pinellas and Pasco counties, I haven't been doing as much work in Pinellas and Pasco counties. Just haven't really been getting appointed to cases here, which I don't know if that's coincidental or intentional, but right. I have some thoughts, but nothing to verify anything. But I knew I wanted to do capital work primarily and to make a living doing that in Florida. I knew that I was going to have to travel outside of my home jurisdiction of Pinellas and Pasco counties. And so I work in all 67 counties in Florida. I also consult nationally. I have also practiced in the state of Louisiana. And so that's how I got involved in a capital case in Miami-Dade County. And I had done a little work in Miami previously. I had been hired by the public defender's office in Miami to help them prepare for some of their capital cases. They have a great capital unit at the public defender's office there, but I had never personally defended any cases in Miami-Dade County. And so, I got consulted, or I got, I guess consulted's the right word, but by some lawyers who were getting ready for a trial, and the defendant had fired them and wanted to represent himself pro se, but was looking for someone to help with jury selection in particular. And I am considered an expert in capital jury selection. And so he was hoping that I would come and that he could potentially retain me, or I could be appointed to help him as a pro se litigant pick his own, I would be the person picking his capital jury. And then we sort of hit it off, and his family was able to retain me, and I got started working in Miami.
And so that brought you to this case, which has been pretty explosive and has revealed some very explosive truths, not just allegations, but truths. So can you share a little bit? First of all, and just to back up for a second, folks, when we use the term pro se, that means that somebody's representing themselves in the court of law rather than relying on an attorney, which I have my opinions about that. I feel that's generally a bad idea because it does not. Again, you're trusting people who actually have legal expertise and things like that. But again, it is your constitutional right to do so. What happens is that backup counsel is basically appointed so that you can lean over and ask a question. But again, you have to know questions to ask. But I digress. So tell us a little bit more about this case and what happened.
Sure. And so my client's name is Corey Smith. He is believed to be the person who ran the John Doe street gang in the 90s in Liberty City in Miami. He's been convicted of crimes related to being in the leadership, at the very least, of that gang, both federally and in the state system. And so he was initially sentenced to life without the possibility of parole by the federal government. That sentence has since been reduced to 60 years. And he was initially sentenced to the death penalty by the state of Florida for 2 of the 4 murders, first-degree murders, that he has been convicted of. And he was granted relief, meaning he got a new sentencing trial. So his convictions have been maintained, but the sentences have been vacated on the 2 counts that he received death. And so his family, when Corey and I connected, his family was able to hire me on those 2 counts for the purpose of exclusively representing him at that point on a resentencing. So not challenging his convictions at that point, trying to ask a jury now to sentence Corey to life without the possibility of parole versus the death penalty. Again, he is serving 60 years federally. He is sentenced to 2 life sentences in the state of Florida for the 2 other first-degree murders, plus like 300 years consecutively for crimes like RICO, conspiracy to traffic in narcotics, things you'd kind of expect associated with gang leadership. I entered a notice of appearance June 5th. Corey's case was set for trial June 12th at that point. The judge, Andrea Wolfson, asked me, was I only going to be willing to file a notice of appearance if she was going to continue the trial? And I said, candidly, I don't play that game. Like, I'm here to represent Corey Smith, and I'm going to do that. I don't think I can be ready in a week to represent this man's life for crimes that happened 25 years ago and spanned at least half a decade, if not longer. State and federal prosecution, post-conviction proceedings, et cetera. But I said, you're going to give me a date. I'm going to enter a notice of appearance. I'm going to represent this man. You're going to give me a date, and I'm going to do my very best to get prepared. That's all I can tell, Your Honor. And so she ended up having an ex parte, which means I was not present, conversation with the prosecutors at their request in that initial court appearance, June 5th of last year, 2023. And the prosecutors continuously made representations about their witnesses feeling threatened, their lives feeling threatened by Corey, and that there was a necessity to go to trial as quickly as possible because the lives of these witnesses were in danger. And I'm not making light of that. What I'm making light of is their accusations that Mr. Smith was responsible, when ultimately we heard jail calls suggesting the prosecutor was trying to eliminate one of the state witnesses who was no longer cooperating with the state. But they have this conversation without me present with the judge. And she comes back and says, we're going to go to trial August 28th. So again, this is June 5th to August 28th in the world of death penalty defense.
That's a short one.
Right. Trying to get ready in 3 months for, again, a case that spans 25 years, several systems of prosecution. It was a massive undertaking, to say the least. The case ultimately gets continued from August 28th till September 11th, which was a 2-week continuance, and then from September 11th to January 16th of 2024. In those 7 months, I met with as many surviving witnesses as I could locate. And both fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of those witnesses are incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections. And so Corey was prosecuted not as the person who pulled the trigger. There's 6 homicides, 4 murders, and 2 manslaughters. He is not believed to be the trigger man in any of those homicides, with the exception of one, the murder of Leon Hadley. But all of the other ones were supposedly done at his instruction or his behest as the leader of the John Does, and somebody else actually killed the victim in those cases. And so, like, I met with the gentleman who's incarcerated, who's believed to be the actual perpetrator of the murder of Cynthia Brown. And I met with a lot of the witnesses who had cooperated with either the feds or the state in either the feds or the state's initial prosecution of Corey, both in custody and out of custody. Because I didn't have much discovery. The state of Florida told me they did not have any discovery. They told me they had destroyed everything, which turns out to be a bold-faced lie.
And to clarify, discovery is basically the documents that the prosecutor turns over to the defense, what you're going to rely on in trial. So police reports, DNA, witness statements, those types of information. That's by law in the state of Florida, the prosecution has to turn that information over. Sorry.
Right. And Right. And the specific prosecutor, Michael Von Zamp, said that he had no police reports, none. And I'm like, okay, you guys are about to prosecute this person, asking a jury to sentence him to die. And you're telling me you have no police reports related to any of these murder cases. And he ultimately begrudgingly agreed to reach out to the City of Miami Police Department to see if they had any police reports, reference only the 2 murders that Corey was being resentenced on, not any of the other ones, even though the state was using those other crimes certainly to aggravate these murders toward a sentence of death, right? And so I'm like, well, I don't have any of the paperwork, and I'm never going to get through several decades worth of paperwork. And it's somewhat ironic. If they had just given me the discovery, I might not have met with everybody. But when I went to meet with everybody, so a lot of these folks were either co-conspirators, rival drug dealers. One was Corey's ex-girlfriend, but she had also federal charges pending at the time she testified against Corey. And so they were massively incentivized to cooperate with the government to help themselves at the time. And now they're less incentivized. And so, right, I mean, I drug my co-counsel, Craig Wisenhunt, and my mitigation specialist, Kate O'Shea, all over the state. And we had a really truncated time frame. So, I mean, I drove to Tallahassee in a tornado. Tallahassee was having major storms to see somebody at Wakulla Correctional Institution, which is actually in Crawfordville, just south of Tallahassee. And Kate was getting on a plane to Texas to go meet a mitigation witness. And she was like, the planes are doing one of these. And I'm like, I'm not sure we make good life choices. But
oh, gosh.
No, but so in the course of meeting with these witnesses, what we learned was there were kind of a group between 5 and 7 alleged co-conspirators who were also charged with crimes, many of whom were charged with the crimes of murder, some of them charged with a lot of murders, who were cooperating with the state. So the state was building its case on the word of these alleged co-conspirators, which is especially critical because, again, my client is not believed even by the state to be the trigger man. He supposedly is, such a dominating presence and control of this gang that anything anybody in the gang does, he's legally responsible for. And so, conversations between these alleged co-conspirators and their testimony being corroborative of each other's, right? Their testimony being the same with each other's was critically important in this case, maybe more than any other case. But so in meeting with them, we learned that all of the witnesses were brought from the different Miami-Dade correctional institutions. One was in federal prison, most were in the county jail facilities, but they were brought to the City of Miami Police Department. Corey demanded a speedy trial June 4th of 2004. And so the state had to bring him to trial within about 60 days, which actually got prolonged due to illness of one of the prosecutors or a family member of one of the prosecutors, but in a short time frame. And so they were bringing this group of alleged co-conspirators to the City of Miami Police Department daily with their discovery material, their police reports, their deposition transcripts, putting them in the conference room in the homicide unit and allowing them to corroborate and collude and conspire to get their stories straight.
So hang on. I got to put it, because you said a lot there, and I want to make sure people understand that this is not normal. You literally, the prosecution brought all of their witnesses together, put them all in the same room, with all of the documents that they told you didn't exist.
Right. Well, they told me they didn't exist now. I think they agree they existed in 2004, but sure. Yes.
And put them all together to make sure that they all got on the same page and said the same story.
Well, and that's correct. With one tiny asterisk is the prosecutor at the time is now a judge on the 3rd District Court of Appeal, which is one of our 6 intermediary appellate courts between the trial court and the Florida Supreme Court. And so she is a very highly regarded, credentialed member of the judiciary. And she, of course, denies. That's not quite true. She admits to knowing some of this. Largely, the prosecutors have taken the approach, and one of the prosecutors, I should say, is also deceased, George Chalakis, so obviously he's not been available to speak to. but largely it's been, we, the prosecutors, didn't know this was happening. It was done by law enforcement. We would tell law enforcement we needed these witnesses at the City of Miami Police Department to prep their testimony. The fact that the City of Miami police detectives, the homicide detectives, put them all in the conference room together and whatever they gave them access to, that was, and what's wild is when these allegations came out with a prior lawyer that represented Corey. And this is the part that I think I find not maybe most offensive, but it's up there on the offensive chart. So one of these witnesses who's serving life without the possibility of parole, who was a rival drug dealer of Corey's at the time, told Corey's prior lawyers, hey, they brought us all to the police station together. We were allowed to talk about our testimony, get our story straight. They also fed us whatever we wanted, and we were able to have access to friends and family. And some of those friends were girlfriends, and sometimes things of a sexual nature happened at the City of Miami Police Department.
They're basically running a brothel.
Here's pictures. Here's the best part. My favorite part about the whole thing is the police officers, again, it is very clear that either nobody thought they were doing anything wrong or they never were going to be caught, because the gentlemen were allowed to take pictures, which some of them have kept in their property in the Florida Department of Corrections since then. I mean, there is a picture of all of the homicide detectives with all of these alleged co-conspirators, some of whom have committed like 8-9 murders, on the kind of ramp going into the City of Miami Police Department. The in-custody inmates are all smoking Black and Milds. The one detective is like kneeling in front of all of these guys, and the one co-conspirator witness is like doing a finger gun to the detective's head. And I'm just like, what? You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up. There's pictures of, that's where some of it sounded so incredulous at first that you're like, this can't be real.
Right.
So I meet with the witness separate witness, and I say, hey, did you and the other witnesses, were you guys together at the City of Miami Police Department? He says, we sure were. And I said, did you ever have access, or did your friends or family ever come to visit you? He said, yeah, they did. And I said, do you remember anybody who visited you specifically? And he said, yep, my mom, a couple girlfriends, etc. And so I said, do you have contact information for any of those people? He said, yeah, I do. And so I call this one woman who Demetrius, the witness, hasn't spoken to in, 20 years, 16 years. And she answers the phone. And I said, hey, I represent a gentleman named Corey Smith. I got your contact information from Demetrius Jones. Do you have like 10, 15 minutes to chat? And she said, sure, what's up? And I said, do you remember ever, again, she doesn't know me from Eve, hasn't talked to Demetrius for him to like tell her what to say. And now she's very upset with me for being roped into this, in large part because of how law enforcement has responded after the fact. But I said, did you ever have occasion to visit Demetrius at the City of Miami Police Department when he was actually an inmate at TGK? And she says, yeah, I did. And I was like, where'd you guys meet? And she was like, in one of the conference room. And I said, did you think it was weird, that you were allowed to be in the conference room with him kind of unsupervised? And she's like, yeah. I asked him, like, how did y'all pull this off? I'm paraphrasing, of course. And he said something like, don't worry about it. We're tight with the detectives. They kind of let us do what we want. And I said, did anything unusual happen in the course of that visit? And she kind of laughed. And again, I don't know this woman. She doesn't have to tell me anything about this. And I said unusual in the sense that like, it definitely wouldn't have happened if you visited him at TGK. And so I was trying to see, maybe it would have been the same if she saw him at the jail. And she was like, yeah, we were allowed to hug and kiss. And at one point he put his hand up my skirt and did sort of what you think that I'm implying. And so it wasn't even just like one witness said this, all of the witnesses said it. And then people who had no connection to this case or any reason to help Corey Smith or any of the witnesses or corroborate this version of events started coming forward saying the same thing. And
So,
so that,
so just again putting a finer point on this, because folks got to see, like, this is why this is so problematic. You do not have witnesses that are going to testify sit together in the same room and work on their stories. That is unethical, illegal, unconstitutional, like all of the things. That's bad, because that's not a necessarily a fair trial, because you don't know. It's the differences between my vantage point and your vantage point in seeing something, which is where the jury looks to see, okay, could this really have happened the way that the prosecution said it did? Or is it true that the defendant really wasn't a part of this, right? So all of these things are important to make sure that the guardrails of fair trials and fair prosecutions actually happen. And that didn't happen here, which is
right.
so disturbing. So sorry, tell us a little bit more about then what ended up happening in court.
Couple things. One, it's part of the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office standard operating procedure that it's okay with witnesses right now. We pulled their SOPs for now to meet with witnesses jointly, which I agree with your concerns. They apparently do not share them, but
I'm like speechless, because I've been a prosecutor in that office. I never, you have had maybe, let's say, detectives, right? Because they both are there at the same time. They work the case. That's different. But
right.
Million witnesses, you do not put them together like that. I trained my prosecutors not to do that.
I'll send you the SOPs. It's pretty wild. I'm working on another case there now. And we pulled the SOPs for a post-conviction hearing that's coming up. And we're like, well, no wonder they don't think they did anything wrong. And I got off track before when I said, like, one of the more offensive things. So one of the witnesses said this information to one of my predecessor counsel, a lawyer that represented Corey before, Bruce Fleischer, his staff. So the witness is a gentleman by the name of Anthony Fail. He's serving life without the possibility of parole. He meets with a prior mitigation specialist and investigator for Corey Smith, and he tells him all this. We were brought to the police department together. They gave us whatever food we wanted. We smoked Black and Miles. We were allowed to have access to friends and family. Some of the guys had sex or did sexual things with girlfriends who were able to visit. And when Bruce Fleischer, the prior lawyer, reported that, he filed it in a legal pleading instead of the state, Michael von Zanft, investigating whether or not that was true. He accused the defense team staff, the investigator and the mitigation specialist, of witness tampering. He accused them of crimes. They had to get lawyers. And so, like, I couldn't, the investigator, who I think is fabulous, and I have a great investigator now, I don't mean to slight her, but the prior investigator who'd been on the case for 5-6 years, refused to work on the case because he was accused of a crime and had to hire a lawyer. And what's so wild about it is, like, we asked the state list all these detectives, and we said, we'd like to speak to these detectives in advance of the hearing. And we had a Zoom meeting with the one City of Miami homicide detective, now retired. And I was like, hey, Detective Silva, did you ever have occasion to bring all these guys and one gal to the City of Miami Police Department together? And he was like, yeah. And I said, how often? He's like, like every day. And I said, did you feed them? And he said, yeah, I mean, we couldn't let him starve. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but like the jail would have sent him with a bag lunch, right? Like when you go to court or wherever. And I said, did you ever allow them to have access to their friends or family? And he was like, yeah. He's like, I loved it when the friends and family would bring food, because then it was less money out of my pocket because I was feeding these guys whatever they were asking for. And I said, the whole point of you feeding them whatever they were asking for beyond just the bag lunch that the jail would send you out with is you were trying to curry their favor. You wanted them to help you. And when he testified at the hearing, he was one of the most straightforward detectives. He was like, absolutely, we needed their help. And to your earlier point, when you say, like, my vantage point from your vantage point, again, remember that, like, my client is being prosecuted as not the actual killer. So they're meeting with, in large part, some of the actual killers who are saying, Corey ordered me to do it to get a deal. And then other people are saying, yep, I heard that conversation where Corey ordered Eric, or Corey ordered Julius, or Corey ordered whomever. So it's largely corroborating conversations that may or may not have we know the murders happened, right? And in some cases, we know who committed the murders, and it wasn't Corey Smith. But to make him criminally liable, these people were corroborating conversations and information that they may not have independently had, but for these meetings that were taking place at the police department.
Yeah.
And so to make a very long story a little bit shorter, we have a hearing. This all comes out. We start getting jail calls. One of the witnesses actually says to me, you need to get the jail calls between a man named LaTravis Galashaw and the prosecutor, Michael Von Zandt. LaTravis Galashaw is believed to be Corey's number 2. I actually think at the point these murders were happening, that LaTravis was more like Corey's. They were equally in charge. At some point, LaTravis kind of steps up into a leadership role and is no longer a number 2. But one of the witnesses said, you need to get these calls. LaTravis was calling Michael Von Zandt weekly. And so I get a court order, which the state, of course, objects to. And it's like, I am entitled to any statement a co-conspirator or a co-defendant makes pursuant to the rules of discovery. And the state of Florida is objecting to me getting calls from a co-defendant, co-conspirator, and now state witness to the prosecutor, which I thought was just the most inflammatory, offensive stuff I'd seen in a while. But so the judge, over the state's objection, ordered Miami-Dade Corrections to provide us with the jail calls. So the morning of the final arguments, we've heard all the testimony. The Miami-Dade Corrections facilities give us 1,900 jail calls between LaTravis Galashaw and everybody, not just the state attorney's office. And so thankfully and that was 1,900 calls in like a 6-month span. We initially just got a court order from like June of 2022 to October of 2022. So we're not talking about 20 years ago. We're talking about 18 months prior to the hearing. And on one of the calls, and thank God Craig is my co-counsel, is an IT genius. He was able to isolate the calls that were just to Michael's direct extension. And then we were able to isolate calls that were longer than 3 minutes, because usually 3 minutes was that recording that comes up when you get a call from the jail. And it was Michael's assistant, Sherry, answering and having some pleasantries and saying Michael wasn't available. So we were trying to find, because we were literally about to walk into court. So we're trying to find calls to Michael's direct extension that are longer than 3 minutes. And so we find a call. We're sitting in the car, and we're sitting in the car at Miami-Dade Corrections, Craig and I, listening to these calls on his computer, and it took my breath away. So Corey's ex-girlfriend, her name is Trisha. At one point, she said to me that she no longer wanted to be on Team Michael when she expressed to him that she did have some fear for her safety, not necessarily from Corey, but Corey was a big deal in the community and that somebody might harm her thinking that they were helping Corey. And so she expressed to Michael that she had some concern about her safety generally. And he, again, in paraphrase, made some kind of comment to her like, well, if you're dead, you become unavailable. And I can read back your prior trial testimony from 2004. So you'd probably be more helpful to me dead. Which is when she decided, as she calls it, she no longer wanted to be on Team Michael. And then sure enough, we're listening to the jail calls, and Michael Von Zandt is talking to LaTravis Galashaw. LaTravis Galashaw, again, is believed to be number 2 in this homicidal gang. LaTravis Galashaw has been convicted of 2 murders himself. And I will just say the state attorney's office agreed to 13 years, 11 months, and 17 days as far as a sentence for him goes. Yet my client is 2 murders. And wait, it gets better. And a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and the alleged victim was a prosecutor. So for 2 murders and a attempted murder of a prosecutor, he got time served, 13 years, 11 months, and 17 days. And so I'm like, I'm having a real hard time with why one guy is your go-to, which seems to be consistent with now what we've learned about Bill Brown and the stuff that's coming case. That's actually the post-conviction hearing I was referring to. But like, you know, they decide who's good or bad. I don't know. But so LaTravis was convicted of 2 murders and a plot to kill a prosecutor. And LaTravis was certainly involved in the murder of this woman, Cynthia Brown, who is believed to have been killed because she witnessed Corey committing another murder. And so it's what we call a witness elimination type murder, right? That she was killed, the belief is, because she witnessed another murder. And in spite of all that, Michael Von Zandt is talking to this guy, one, like they're best friends. And I mean, sitting there, listening to them talking in court, in the car, took my breath away. In court, I mean, it just continues to kind of flood me with emotions. But at some point, they're talking about Trisha, who they call the Black Widow. And LaTravis says something to Michael, the prosecutor, like, what are you going to do if Trisha doesn't play ball? Again, I'm paraphrasing. These aren't direct quotes. But Michael responds, well, if she won't get on board, I'll find a way to make her unavailable. That is a direct quote. And LaTravis Galashaw, again, a 2-time convicted murderer, also convicted of a plot to kill a prosecutor, also part of the murder of a woman believed to be a witness to another murder, says in response, is that what you want? And so Judge Wolfson and thankfully Michael Von Zandt says, no, that's not what I want. I just want her to get on board and get her act straight. But Judge Wolfson in her order said that she, the judge, was not making a finding that Michael Von Zandt was discussing with a gentleman convicted of murder and witness elimination murder, the possibility of, she found that they weren't conspiring to kill another witness, but she said that reasonable minds could disagree. And I'm like, the fact that a judge acknowledges that other people could well listen to this call and think the prosecutor is talking to a convicted murderer about offing a witness just floored me. And then we're in this whole hearing about the collusion. At least part of the hearing was about the collusion of these witnesses back in 2004. And then the call that's from 2022, after they talk about making Trisha unavailable, Michael, the prosecutor, says to LaTravis Galashaw, I've been trying to find a way to put you, Demetrius Jones, the witness, and Bill Brown, another career informant snitch for the state attorney's office, together in the courtyard at TGK. But Miami-Dade Corrections won't allow it. And I'm like, we're in a hearing about witness collusion, listening to a call where the prosecutor is talking about having these witnesses collude. And the comment comes of note. So Galashaw, the convicted murderer, says to the prosecutor, what about rehabilitating Jones? What about rehabbing Jones? Meaning like, can we bring Demetrius Jones kind of back into the fold so he's cooperating with the state again? And that's when Michael says, I've been trying to put you, him, and another snitch in the courtyard together, in brackets, seemingly to conspire and get your story straight, but corrections won't allow it. And in the hearing, I said pretty much exactly that. And the prosecutor said, well, she's put her spin on it. Anybody could put their spin on it however they see fit. Excuse me. And the judge was like, go ahead, sir, put your spin on it. How do you spin that? And he said, well, they're all informants. They're all snitches. And so I was talking about just allowing them kind of recreational time for their safety.
Right. Come on.
Right. If the judge could have made that face, she would have, but she, like, to her credit, remained remarkably stoic. But again, the comment comes on the heels of what about rehabbing Jones to make him a witness? And Michael says, I've been trying to put you three in the courtyard together. And so fair to say the judge did not buy the state's spin on what he was talking about. So in one 10-minute call, they talk about making one witness unavailable and talk about putting three other witnesses, one of who ostensibly has nothing to do with Corey Smith's case. He's just a career snitch for the state attorney's office, Bill Brown. They talk about putting them all together so they can collude or coordinate their testimony. And so the judge in her order, it was one of the, I don't know, defining moments of my career. Seems maybe not right, but it was a high point. The judge in her order said it was a Perry Mason moment, that Perry Mason at the end of his show, would find that smoking gun, and that almost never happens in real life, but it happened here. Mm-hmm. And so the judge ended up disqualifying all of the prosecutors who were on the case at that time: Michael Von Zampt, Stephen Mitchell, who's still at the state attorney's office, and Joshua Huebner. I will note that I think the perception is that Michael Von Zamp was largely responsible for the things that had happened in this case. And I think that's certainly true to an extent, but Huebner and Mitchell also were disqualified on their own volition, not just because they were, carrying Von Zamp's purse or whatever. Yeah. Right. I mean, we have all the arguments, we listen to the call, we're done. And the judge says, and because we'd been moving to disqualify the entire state attorney's office because Michael Von Zampt has a history of this kind of behavior. He has sustained bar complaints. He is this supported by reputation, anecdotal, you name it, type evidence. This is who Michael Von Zampt is as a prosecutor. And so obviously my belief is that the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office has cultivated a culture where his behavior is not only tolerated, it's expected.
And celebrated.
Yeah, he's been promoted, right? I mean, this stuff, since the original bar complaint was sustained, he's continued to enjoy promotions. He was one of the highest paid assistant state attorneys at that office, and featured many times in Miss Fernandez-Rendell's press conferences. But so we have this whole hearing. It all comes out. It's wild. We listened to this call. It was the last day of the last hearing, and the judge says, does anybody have anything else they want to say? And Stephen Mitchell stands up, and all I can say is had a tantrum, threw some sort of hissy fit. I mean, he just lost his mind and was like, this whole thing has been offensive. We did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong 20 years ago. This has been a waste of everybody's time. I mean, he went on this diatribe, and we were all just sort of stunned by it. Again, all the argument was over. It was just have a nice weekend. Anybody have anything left they want to say? And he lost his mind. And he goes through this whole thing after this whole hearing about all of this. I mean, Von Zampt also admitted to calling the one witness on the witness's burner phone in the Florida Department of Corrections, which is a crime. Any one of us would have been.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Right. I was like, I knew he'd communicated with Anthony Fail on Anthony Fail's burner cell phone in the DeSoto Correctional Institution. But when he admitted it, I was like, well, damn. And so after all of this, to have a prosecutor stand up and say nobody has done anything wrong over the course of these last 25 years after we had a nearly 6-week hearing, again, was just shocking. And then he sits down, and my colleague Craig, to his credit, stands up, and it was like, that's why the whole office has to go. If you sat through the last 6 weeks of this hearing and you thought nobody did anything wrong, then that is the sort of systemic failure we're talking about here. Wow. I mean, it was like a mic drop moment. And Judge Wolfson I think that was the first time she was noticeably shook by all of it.
Right. But this is so, again, this is unprecedented in so many ways, because number one, you can't have witnesses trying to get their story straight. And number two, I know folks might be like, but all these people are involved in gang activity and they're murderers and there's this and there's that. But if you don't observe the guardrails, right, you end up with an exonerated 5. That is how the Central Park 5 ended up becoming the exonerated 5, right? Because this win at all costs mentality, and we will cut corners, or let me see if I could put pressure on someone else to put pressure on another witness. That's cute on TV, but not in real life, because that's literally people's liberty. You got to win by the book, not any old how, and then end up in a situation where people's lives get irrevocably changed or murdered as a result. I mean, what did they mean by rehab? Was that rehab, have a discussion? Or was that rehab, give him a beat down until he decides to comply? Like, what words have meaning and also have double meaning. So what was he hoping? When I say he, I'm talking Michael Van Zant. What was he hoping would happen? And what types of actions was he hoping these people that have a track record of using violence to solve problems, what did you think they were going to do?
Right. Well, and what's, I think, notable about the point you just made is the Central Park Five were innocent, right? And so what I think really has frustrated me about the reporting in this case is it's like, yeah, they did some really awful things, the prosecutors, but it was to get this monster, this homicidal gangbanger that was just, they were ridding the scourge of crime from Liberty City by locking who the narrators are of the story that Corey Smith is a monster, the same people perpetuating this kind of grossly unethical, if not criminal conduct. And they all built their careers on it, right? So Bronwyn Miller, she jumps in, they push Chilakas to the side. Bronwyn Miller jumps in as the prosecutor right before Corey's case. He's sentenced to die in 2005. And within months, she was appointed to the trial court bench as a judge. And now she's been elevated to the 3rd DCA. And so I'm like, these prosecutors built their careers on putting away the big bad Corey Smith. And it's like, who said he was the big bad Corey Smith? Them. And so I have never stood here and said Corey Smith is a saint. He's not. Who among us is, right? We are all, every person is some good and some bad. That is just fundamentally how humanity works. But I will say that I very much believe Corey was wrongfully convicted of these murders because I have no faith in the integrity of the convictions. How they got the convictions, I have no faith in any of it. I mean, in some of the stuff, you're like, well, of course. I mean, what? And it's awful, right? This woman gets killed because she's in a relationship with Anthony Fail, and Anthony Fail, by everyone's account, is the target, and she's driving his car, and the car gets shot up and she is in it. And by everyone's account, she was not the intended victim. And Corey is in jail when this happens, yet somehow he is still responsible for all of his underlings' actions and beliefs. And then talking to them now, they all agree that the people who shot up that car knew Anthony Fail wasn't in the car and made the conscious decision to kill Angel Wilson anyway. And so, again, what happened to Angel Wilson should happen to nobody. I mean, it is awful stuff. But the men that killed her were sentenced to far less prison sentences, length of their terms of prison sentences, and they've been released. I met one of them in his bathrobe at his house. I was like, you could run into Crazy E at the grocery store. I mean, they've committed like 8-9 murders, and they got just sweetheart deals to say Corey Smith made me do it. And so I'm like, again, and they're all, I mean, Corey, when he allegedly started running the John Does, was like 21 years old. I don't know a lot of 21-year-old men, and I mean this with all due respect, that have fully formed brains, right? Their brains aren't done cooking.
Right. Right. But, right. but in looking at all this, because we're kind of at that point, but what's going to happen next with your client, and what's going to happen next in this case? Granted, we know you don't have a crystal ball, but what are some of the next steps, and what are some ways people can stay involved to see what's happening and make sure there's accountability?
Yeah. Well, Catherine Fernandez Rendell, the elected state attorney, has just been reelected without opposition for another 4-year term. So that's that. Michael Van Zant resigned after the order came out. But Michael had already retired and was only prosecuting Corey Smith. So he was disqualified off the one case that he had. So his resignation is seemingly meaningless. He has not been investigated by any criminal entity to my knowledge. And I will say I have been contacted by the Department of Justice, who's looking at another state attorney's office in Florida. And I was like, I have other news for you. Right. No. So It turns out the state attorney's office had 150 boxes of discovery, police reports, recordings, etc. And so we were in the process of the state attorney's office going through and providing us, the court has ordered that it be digitized. And so we get massive discovery dumps daily from the state attorney's office, which we'll of course have to review at some point. I have also moved to vacate Corey's convictions because, as I've said, like, I certainly think, he had a role in the John Doe street organization. And I'm not in any way suggesting that he should be nominated for sainthood, nor should I. I don't mean that critically of Corey, but I do think that he's been wrongfully convicted of 4 murders. And so I've asked the judge to vacate all of his convictions and give him a new trial. And the reality is, there was an article in the Miami Herald about whether Michael Von Zandt, he was a paradox. Is he a saint? Is he the bad guy? Whatever. And it's like, he's definitely not a saint, because even if his convictions were good, in any case, they're now going to be questioned.
Yeah.
And so more than anything, when someone is murdered, I mean, you can never make that person's family whole ever again, but you want to, at the very least, give justice to their family and bring closure to their family so that they can heal and move on. And now we're at this critical kind of angle where every one of these prosecutors' convictions could be re-examined. And the ball has already started rolling. I mean, there was another article about this other gentleman, Tajee Pearson, being convicted, and the use of Bill Brown, who's mentioned on the Galashaw calls. So this very much seems consistent with Michael Von Zandt's behavior over a career of nearly 3 decades. And so we are pending hearing that motion to vacate all of Corey's convictions. It's basically for a new trial. So instead of just a resentencing, the state would have to retry him. And Judge Wolfson, even when it comes, at some point, if we lose every motion, we're still going to have to do the resentencing proceedings. Mm-hmm. Where he was already granted relief. And Judge Wolfson said a number of times throughout the course of the hearing, I don't know how the state is ever going to re-prosecute Mr. Smith, because all of the witnesses that they depended upon to get these convictions have changed their testimony. Some of them, like one of them changed his testimony in the same hearing. So it's kind of a nightmare. I have to question the wisdom of the use of taxpayer resources and time, knowing that Corey, I mean, he's been in prison 25 years, but is still serving the better part of a 60-year federal sentence, regardless of what happens with these state crimes.
Step by step.
Step by step. And the judge did hear part of the motion for a new trial, or the motion to vacate his convictions, kind of concurrently or at the same time as she heard the motion to disqualify the state attorney's office. And so we're at that point, and Judge Wolfson said something like, I think that you'll find your experience with the newly assigned prosecutors very different than your experience with the last set. And it's different. It's definitely different. It hasn't been great. As part of her order, so Judge Wolfson disqualified the 3 prosecutors handling Corey's case. Then we said, really, to put like force and effect into this order, you really can't use the 2 legal assistants working with Michael, these 2 other prosecutors who were part of the team at one point, and these 2 investigators. There's a lot more story that could be offered there. And the judge agreed that they're too integrated into the team. And again, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office is one of the largest in the state. There are over 200 lawyers. We were asking for, and like Michael Von Zandt's left, Huebner's left, Stephen Mitchell's been disqualified. We're asking for literally 1, maybe 2 additional prosecutors who are part of the team, right? And worked at, integrated with this team to not be involved going forward. And Judge Wolfson agreed that was appropriate to put into force and effect her order disqualifying the 3 that she did. And the state has appealed that decision to the 3rd District Court of Appeal. Not the decision to disqualify the prosecutors, the decision to not allow the extra folks where I'm like, y'all don't have like any other prosecutors you could put on this case?
Well, I'm hearing they're a little short-staffed, but that's a separate discussion.
They have 200, they had 222 lawyers. I'm like, you can't find anybody other than this one prosecutor who worked for Michael Von Zamp to prosecute this case? It seems wild. So we're litigating that in front of the third DCA, which again is rich because 2 of the third DCA judges are former prosecutors on this case and listed witnesses.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So clearly, there's lots for folks to stay tuned on. I would love to bring you on again in a couple of months once there's been a few more hearings so that we can get the update as to what's going on. And again, people have to use their power at the ballot box to hold elected officials accountable if they are not reflective of the views of this community. And, granted, she did not receive opposition, and she, being the state attorney, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, did not receive opposition this last go round, but that doesn't mean that won't change in 2028. That doesn't mean that the governor couldn't come in and remove her from office. I mean, there's a lot of different available options, so to speak, that could happen. So it's about the public deciding what pathway they think is going to be the best and fighting and advocating for that. So that's why it's key to have information. So Allison, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I always think that, unfortunately, elected officials are often motivated to act by public outcry. And so at it's Judge Wolfson sent her order to the Florida bar that regulates lawyers for the Florida bar to investigate Von Zamp, Mitchell, and Huebner's conduct. But frankly, Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office has a history of doing this where it need be that another state attorney's office could be referred to investigate whether any of these men committed crimes. They accused some of Corey's former defense staff of witness tampering. At one point, I was threatened in an email by Joshua Huebner that if I persisted in filing these documents, it would warrant further review. Wink. I'm still waiting on my apology for that. But, to me, Michael Von Zamp's the brazenness with which these prosecutors speak to convicted murderers on the jail calls is really astounding. And it bears investigating so that there is public trust in the system, if nothing else. And so, if you've heard this and you have a problem with how the state attorney's office has handled that, elected officials are beholden to the electorate, and they're supposed to make themselves accessible to the electorate. And so, we all need to make our voices heard to make sure that justice happens. I think justice is a shared responsibility.
Amen to that. Allison, thank you so much. And thank you for coming on and giving us this important information. Folks, stay tuned. There will be links in the comments or in the body of this video so that you can learn more about the case and actually hear the jail call for yourself. And you make the decision as to what the intent was. And, govern yourself accordingly, as we like to please. Or to be more blunt about it, decide what you want to do at the ballot box and to whom. So with that, take good care, y'all. Bye.